Hello foliage family, my name's Romani, the mother of many leafy boys, and today is going to be the long-awaited Alocasia Care video. So today I am sitting in my little alocasia corner where majority of my alocasias are kept. After my plant tours, I had a lot of questions about my alocasia care in general, and this is something that I've also had a lot of questions over on my Instagram, and it is really hard in short form content to get across a lot of the care requirements for alocasia in depth. So I'm actually going to be splitting this video into two parts. Part one is going to be a general care guide. This is the general care that most alocasias want, going through 5 of my key tips. The second video will be specific to each alocasia. So it will essentially be an alocasia collection tour where I show you every single alocasia I own in my collection and talk about the specific care needs for that particular alocasia, because I find that each one differs slightly from the general care guide. As for today's video, there are 5 key things that I want to go over, and those will go light, watering, plant size, humidity, and pests. Hopefully that covers everything that we need to talk about today. So I'm going to start with light. As you can see by how overexposed this part of my shot is, this room gets quite a lot of light. This is with my sheer curtains closed. There's still a lot of bright light coming in. We're sitting at around 2:30, I think, in the afternoon, and actually, ironically, during summer, these plants get less light. So during autumn and the winter months, there are direct, really strong beams of light that hit the plants behind me here, that hit my 2 alocasias in the back corner. That's because this window over here is north facing. Because of the angle of the sun getting a little bit lower during that autumn and winter kind of time, these windows, as the sun is passing over, actually get quite a lot of light. But even in summer, you can see there's a lot of bright ambient light in this room. Alocasia are really sun loving. I kind of find that you can't give them too much light. There's an asterisk there. You can't give them too much light after acclimation. I have alocasia quite literally outside getting direct rays of light, full sun in Australia. But I had to acclimate the plant to that sunlight. I slowly had to move it from inside my house to in the shade on the veranda to in the sun on the veranda, then to outside. And that took 7 months to slowly move out to get bright sunlight. I find what happens is a lot of people will take their plants from the nursery. It's been growing in really bright light in greenhouses most likely, and then you're putting it in like a moderate light, meter away from the window, quite dark, lacking in humidity, and it just dies. It cycles through its leaves, it loses a lot of its bottom leaves, it can't hold on because it can't sustain those leaves. It's just having a really rough go of it, and most of the time it's because you aren't giving it the light that it really wants or requires. If you're getting an alocasia, make sure that you actually have the light for it. That could either be putting it really close to a window. Some of my really small alocasia, like these, are actually on the windowsill behind me. I've got a big circular stand that sits by the window here, and a lot of my little alocasia are all sitting right by the window and get direct beams of light hitting them for a couple of hours every single day. The plants on this side here, they get less light obviously now, but will get more light as the seasons go on. And I've got one even further away, but that's because it has a bit of a pest problem. However, I have a Soltec light that helps to supplement that. So if you can't give it the natural light, you may have to invest in things like grow lights in order to supplement the bright light that these plants really require. My second point, which is watering. So these plants are quite thirsty as well. I find a lot of people end up putting their alocasia in pon. I only have one that's in pon, and that's this one here. So you can see that it's in pon. It's my own like little mixture of pond that I've made because I didn't want to pay for a really expensive pond mix, and you can get all the parts for it at Bunnings essentially. And to be fair, it wasn't until I put this in a self-watering pot in pond that this alocasia actually turned around for me. It was the one alocasia I struggled with, which was the Frydek, or the variegated Frydek. But I haven't found that to be the same for most of my others. Every single other alocasia, including the massive ones behind me, are all being grown in soil and are perfectly happy. So for the most part, watering really comes down to what substrate you have it in. I could tell you have to water once a week, or you have to water every Saturday, but that's going to be different depending on your plant, your substrate, how close to the window it is, how bright of light it is, the season that you're in. There's so many reasons why your watering schedule might be different to mine. I'm going to tell you what mine is with the plants. Hopefully it will give you a good idea of what yours might look like. If it isn't a self-watering pot, it's pretty simple. You check to see if the reservoir level is dropping, and before it completely goes empty, you'll top it up. For this one here, it's in a catch pot. If you lift it up, you'll see that there's water inside of the catch pot. I make sure that that stays full and it soaks in the water. When it comes to soil, it gets a little bit more complicated. So when it comes to the soil, I give it a fairly chunky aeroid soil, but with some added bits and pieces to make it a little bit more moisture retentive. So I'll start off with your bulk standard aeroid soil. If you're not quite sure where to start on what an aeroid soil actually is, you can Google it, you can buy aeroid soils, or you can check out my Instagram where I do a video going through my specific aeroid soil mix. For an alocasia, it would be that mix, about twice as much of the worm castings, or an extra bit of potting soil mix that just makes it a bit more moisture retentive. But I don't want it to be sludgy, and I don't want to risk getting things like mold. If you get mold inside your pot, it's telling you that there's also not a lot of aeration, and alocasia really still want that aeration in their pot. Here's a bit of a close-up of what some of the soil in my alocasia pots look like. As you can see, it is quite chunky, but the coco coir and things in there will help to keep the soil moist for a lot longer. With the alocasia as well, I don't mind letting them sit in a bit of water for a couple of days. Most of my other plants, once I've watered them, I will make sure that it's not sitting in any extra water in the cache pot, otherwise it could lead to a lot of yellowing leaves. But with most of my alocasia, I sort of let them sit in the water for a few days and it will eventually soak it up. Obviously not a massive puddle. I don't want to leave it in like an inch of water all the time because it will rot the roots if it's sitting in that much water and it's a soil mix. But if there's a little bit of water left at the bottom of the pot, about like a couple of millimeters of it, I don't tip it out. I will just go, it will drink it over the next couple of days because again, alocasia are pretty thirsty. What you don't want to do when you're watering is water them too early. I think because we say so often that alocasia are water thirsty, people will water them to the point where they get those yellowing leaves and they drop their leaves. And you end up in that cycle stage where it keeps cycling through its old leaves. Alocasia sometimes just do this, but usually there's an underlying issue. It's not getting enough aeration in the soil, it's being overwatered, there's a sneaky pest that you haven't found yet. And once I've figured out that reason, the leaf cycling happens far less often, and usually I will keep at least 4 leaves on each stem. If there's less, that's usually a sign that something has gone wrong with the plant itself. So this is a susty, and this is the moisture reader that I use for majority of my plants. As you can see, it's covered in soil, but I will quite literally shove this into the pot as far as it can go. You can't go any like further down than that essentially. And when it's blue, it means that the soil inside the pot is wet, it is saturated through. Over the next couple of days, it will slowly get lighter and lighter and lighter blue, and I wait until the day that it goes white, and then I water it again. I don't want to leave it for too many days on white, so when I see the white come up on it, I know it's about time that I actually water my plants. For me, that's pretty much weekly. If you put it in a more moisture retentive soil, potentially you could water less frequently. I'm an overwaterer. I love watering my plants. I love plant care. So because of that, I'm someone who used to overwater my plants a heap. So this is a way for me to water my plants less, and less would be once a week. That's probably crazy for some people who don't want to have 200 plus plants to water every single week, but I find it quite soothing. And this little device has been really, really helpful. I get these from a company called Plants in a Box, and they have a whole bunch of different sizes, a whole bunch of different colors. You'll find them scattered throughout my collection, and if a plant has one of these, it's probably because they are a problem child and someone that I just frequently have been overwatering, and someone who does not like to stay wet and then be re-watered again. Number 3 is plant size. And if you're someone who is venturing into the world of alocasia for the very first time, I think this one is the key advice that I would give anyone who's looking at getting alocasia, and that is get a bigger alocasia first. I obviously have quite small alocasia, but I've also had alocasia for a really long time and feel a little bit more comfortable with their care at this point. I generally know how to take care of most alocasia. Of course, I've made many failures before and, still will continue to make failures, but I feel a little bit more confident in that. I would never suggest someone who's starting off with alocasia to ever get small ones to begin with. So we're gonna go through, I think, what I would probably consider like the 3 stages of like easy alocasia, intermediate, and difficult sizes of alocasia. What I feel is the most common size of alocasia that people start with, and probably the most difficult size of alocasia for people to deal with, is itty bitty baby alocasia. Ones that are this size or this size. And they're just not developed. They're little corms, maybe, that someone's put into a pot and grown, or worst case scenario, they are tissue cultured. There's a big difference between these two, but I would still call them both quite difficult. And let's start with the worst alocasia that you could ever start with in existence. An expensive and not acclimated tissue culture plant like this one here. This one here is from Flora Magnifica, and as alocasias go, these kinds of little babies are actually quite expensive because they are variegated and, fancy rare plants. They are not acclimated to our humidity. Because they're made from tissue culture and they grow in pretty much 100% humidity, you can't just take them to your house and put them in your regular environment. This one I'm actually going to close up for the rest of this video because I've been waving it about, but it has not been in its little humidity catchment. So if I take it out for too long, I'm going to start getting those melty leaves. If you look on the corners, you can see all those melty leaves. It's not very happy. That was just from traveling because it's very new to my collection. But it is going to get worse. It's going to get crispy and it's going to be very unhappy if I keep it out for too long. So I'm putting it back in this little container. So there are heaps of options for keeping humidity up for these guys. You could put them into plastic containers. This is the one it came in. Cloches, slushy cups are another great one, but I'll talk more about humidity domes and care when I go into my second video. Essentially, these guys need way more humidity. In my experience, just simply putting on a humidifier is not enough humidity. It needs to be inside of a dome for a period of time. It eventually will acclimate, but that's a hard process to go through and it's a hard acclimation. Next step up from that is a tiny little alocasia that's been grown from corms. Now, hopefully, best case, these corms have been grown in your local area. It's worse when they're from online or being shipped to you because you just don't know what conditions they were grown in, and it's going to go through an acclimation process. For these, because they come from corms and not tissue culture, that acclimation process might be fairly smooth depending on the plant, but overall it's still a really big shock to the alocasia to go through that whole process of acclimating. It's acclimating to potentially a new soil if you've taken it out of sphagnum moss, or a new watering schedule. Maybe you're using a different fertilizer, maybe it's getting different sunlight, maybe it's getting different humidity. There's so many things that are going to be different, and to be frank, it's a baby. It doesn't have the stored energy to deal with all of that. So if you're not getting things right pretty much immediately, you're going to lose more leaves than it physically has, and potentially that's going to lead to it rotting out and dying. The next step up from that is going to be a plant that came to you with a fairly established root system. It's got not fully developed leaves, but it's got semi-mature leaves, I would say. So here are two options. This one here, I wouldn't say is fully mature. It's definitely getting bigger, if you can compare it to my hand size, but I wouldn't say it's a monster alocasia. This one would be a mature leaf here. This one's not quite yet matured. It's going to lose some leaves during its process of coming into your home, but it has a sturdier foundation, and because you've got a thicker chunk at the bottom, if it does end up dying back to just the corm, it's more likely that this is going to reshoot and not rot. So this one is a better option. Probably going to be a little bit more expensive, yes, but it also means that you are less likely to kill the plant. This is like your intermediate version of buying an alocasia. You're just a little bit more likely to keep this one alive. This one here was actually a similar situation. Instead of buying it from a nursery like I did for this one, I bought it at a plant store online. The leaves were originally around this size, so quite a bit smaller than the big leaf I now have, and it came to me bare rooted. So it wasn't in soil, but it had been grown in soil, and it was sent to me with just the bare roots. I then potted it up, as you can see, and very shortly after, so you've got one, that was the next leaf, and that's the most recent leaf. So within 2 new leaves, it has already grown to pretty much its mature size. So absolutely monstrous. So this is what I would call, you know, again, your intermediate or your medium level of difficulty when it comes to alocasias. And the easiest level when it comes to alocasia is quite obviously the really large, already established alocasias that are at their mature form, essentially. I obviously cannot pick them up and put them in front of the camera because they're so big, so I'm gonna have to insert some shots of my Alocasia tanderusa or Jacqueline, my Alocasia green velvet, which is a non-variegated Frydek, and also my Alocasia albo macrorhiza. These 3 plants came to me already very well established. They had a great root system in the pot. I could tell because I've dug my finger in the soil and felt around to see if there were good roots, looked at the bottom, see if there was any roots heading towards the bottom of the pot as well. Great, it looks like it's actually got established inside this pot. If I tried to like pull the stem here, if it had just been repotted and actually was not established in the pot, you would feel it starting to lift. This one here is so well established that if I'm pulling it, it's actually going to come out as one big chunk. So that tells me this has a really nice, well-developed root system in there. If you were pulling it out and the soil was being left behind and the plant was coming out, obviously that's not very established in the pot, and it's going to take some time for it to establish. It might go through some shock as well as it's trying to establish its roots in this pot. Alocasia like to be snug with their root system, but they don't like to be root bound. If you go to the opposite direction and you end up with a root bound one, their leaves are going to start to go yellow. It's going to stop dropping leaves because it doesn't have enough nutrients at that point to sustain the amount of leaves that you want. Obviously, don't go pulling plants out of their nursery pots in the store. Like, you can do it a little bit more subtly. Don't fully rip it apart and be like, well, this one's not established, so I'm putting it back. Be respectful to the plants, but you can definitely still have a look around at the plant and test the sizes and see how well it is snug inside of that pot. If it has less leaves, but it has a better established root system, I would most likely pick that one over a plant that has more leaves, but looks like it's been freshly repotted and just put into a bigger pot. probably not the best option for you. You also want to find an alocasia that already has quite a few leaves. If you're looking at a one leaf plant, the chances are that plant is currently stuck in a cycle where it's going to constantly lose a leaf in order to gain one. But if you get the plant already with quite a few leaves, you're setting yourself up for more success at the end of the day. Number 4, which is humidity. This is something that I often get a lot of comments on. How am I growing wine in room humidity? Alocasias need way more humidity than you're providing them. I live in Australia, in Brisbane. If you're living in somewhere like Melbourne, it's probably a different story due to how cold your winters get. But for me in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, it's very humid. On average in Brisbane, our winters are around 50 to 55% humidity, and our summers are like 75% humidity. So it stays pretty dang humid over here, pretty much constantly. And then if you think about the fact that that's just the average humidity, we have days that are way more humid than that. I'm in a house that's full of plants, and sitting plants together in clusters creates more ambient humidity. So I'm just doubling down on that humidity as much as I possibly can. Don't even have aircon, I only have a fan that runs. So my house stays very humid. People that are used to like dry environments can be quite uncomfortable when living inside of my house, but you know, I tend to enjoy it, so I don't really mind. It is actually important that you give your plants a lot of humidity. If you live in a house that quite often drops below 50% humidity, it is probably going to be in your best interest to consider investing in some sort of greenhouse or IKEA cabinet or humidifier. So I do find that yes, they do need a fair bit of humidity, but I've also seen a lot of alocasias be acclimated to deal with a lot less humidity. A lot of plant collectors have slowly acclimated theirs to dealing with less humidity, the same way that I deal with my tissue culture plants. So obviously I can't show you any alocasias that I have acclimated to live in pretty much under 50% humidity, because most of the time I'm sitting at 50% humidity or more. Sometimes it's a little bit lower, it fluctuates quite a bit depending on the season, but mostly I can say on average they're sitting in 50% humidity at any given time or more. But I can show you plants that have slowly moved from domes into my regular room humidity. A lot of mine sit in something like this, or even like cloches like this. This is one that you can get from IKEA. It looks a lot nicer than a like slushy cup, but at the end of the day, they just need something that captures in that moisture, and these obviously need to be watered a lot less. I think I give them a spritz like maybe once a month. Yeah, it's probably once every 4 waters, I will actually sprinkle a little bit of water in there. But these essentially don't need to be watered that much at all if you're giving it a fully sealed dome. With something like this, unfortunately, because it's glass, this is just the humidity it's gonna have. If I want to acclimate it, it's gonna be a bit difficult. Like I might have to like sit the lid off to the side and yeah, do weird things to eventually introduce more and more room humidity, and it's going to be a bit of a pain to acclimate in that kind of container. That's why I love things like this that have like a separate lid, because while the lid's on, it's giving you a decent While the lid is on, it's giving you a decent amount of humidity, obviously, but you can slowly move the lid off. You can even poke holes in the container and slowly introduce more and more of your room humidity until that plant has finally decided that it is okay to live in your room without any sort of plastic containers or any sort of humidity domes. And I can imagine that you can do the same sort of thing with your own alocasia, but unfortunately this acclimation for humidity really only works if it's a small plant. I don't think I would own anything big enough to do that kind of transition with an alocasia of this size. So that's where you sort of run into the wall of what kind of alocasia you want to start with. Do you want to start with a difficult one but use humidity domes, or do you want to start off with an intermediate one and slowly acclimate it to your collection by maybe grouping them together and getting a humidifier that you slowly stop using as much? Or are you going to get a fully established one and just hope for the best because it's so well established that hopefully it will have enough leaves to cycle through until it's fully adapted to your environment? Up to you. And my fifth and final category that I want to talk about is plant pests. Alocasia get a pretty bad rep when it comes to pests. That was a humidity dome falling. Specifically, I think across the board it's spider mites that are the biggest problem. And if you would have asked me if I dealt with spider mites on my alocasia a year ago, I would have said not really. I think I'd had one alocasia that had spider mites prior to this new house, but recently in this house, yes, I feel like every single alocasia in my collection at some point has received spider mites, but so has 95% of my collection, unfortunately. And I am starting to figure out on my feet how to take care of them, like how to get rid of spider mites. It used to be thrips. Thrips used to be the biggest problem in my collection, and I finally figured out how to eradicate the thrips from my collection. Then I moved and spider mites became the problem, which had never been a problem previously, so I was starting fresh on how to deal with this plant pest. If you want me to go over in a lot more detail how I deal with each of the plant pests that I have in my collection, I'm happy to do a video for that. Just drop it in the comments and let me know that that's something you are interested in hearing about. Recently, I've had to go a little bit more heavy duty when it came to how I'm dealing with the spider mite issue in my collection because it has become slightly problematic. I would say alocasia are probably some of the more prone plants in your collection to getting spider mites, but I also find that pests can tell when plants are under a lot of stress and they will go to that plant because usually they're going to be a little bit more softer in the leaf, they're less robust, and they're more, I guess they're easier for the pests to attack because they sap suck, right? So they latch onto the leaf and they have a good sippy sip. And if your leaf is healthy and it's strong and it's robust, it's actually harder for the pest to break through and num on your plant. But if your plant is struggling, so for instance, it's leaf cycling due to a water issue or something along the lines of that, it's going to be more attractive to the pests because they're going to go, ooh, look over there, a tasty treat. And then it makes it worse because then you've got pests, then it's an angrier plant, then it cycles more, blah, 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 and it just continues. So once you get an alocasia unhappy, it's hard to build up that resilience again so that it's not going to keep getting pests and keep getting upset. So yeah, a little bit of a tangent there, but I do find that if you have a really healthy plant, it is less likely to get pests. And when you have a plant that is unhealthy for some reason, you've overwatered it, underwatered it, it's lacking in some sort of nutrients in its soil, it's getting too bogged down in its soil, it's not getting enough aeration, something along the lines of that, that's when they're going to get attacked by a pest. And I find that a lot of people blame the pests for the issues with their plant before looking at the reason why the plant was unhappy to begin with. Now you can also just have a perfectly healthy plant and it get pests. Definitely reasonable. I just find if it's a healthy plant that's managed to get pests, the pests are pretty easy to get rid of. I usually use a neem oil spray with any pest, wipe it away, and that's the last time I really see the pest on that plant. The reoccurrences only really happen when my plant is already very stressed to do with something in that plant's care. So I guess my general advice here, check your plant before you take it home. make sure it's a really healthy alocasia specimen before you introduce it into your house. Please attempt to isolate your plants before you introduce them to your collection, just in case they do have mites. Washing the leaves down, using a nice little leaf spray to make sure that the plant is nice and cared for before you bring it into your collection, and to wipe away any potential pests that are still living on that leaf. And wash the leaves as often as you can. Every 2 weeks to every month, I'll take my alocasias to the shower and I will wash off all of the leaves to make sure there's no dust and residue. I know it's a lot of extra work, but at the end of the day, it means that they get less pests because they're being cleaned more often. So this is the stuff that I usually spray my leaves down with. It's called Protect from We the Wild. It's a really great brand, but I think you can get a whole heap of different kinds of neem oil sprays. This one is mostly promoted for like keeping your leaves nice and shiny and healthy, but the healthy part of it is because of the neem oil, and that neem oil actually helps to prevent pests. And I even use it after I found pests. So if I found a little batch of spider mites, I will probably take it to the shower, wash the whole plant down, really thoroughly wash the leaves, and then I will drench every leaf in this spray. Sometimes I'll spray it onto like a paper towel and then wipe down the leaves so I can really like wipe away any leftover pests as well. Depends on how thorough I want to be about it. I find that this is actually really helpful, and if you're bringing a plant into your collection for the first time, I would go through that process of washing the leaves and treating it as if you've already found pests, just in case. Sometimes if it's a really small leaf or a really thin leaf, like our difficult level of alocasia, this can make the leaves melt or even burn because it's just too strong for their leaves, especially if it's white variegated and very thin. You could find that that leaf will just crumple up to nothing, which is why these are harder than something like this to take care of. Because if I was to wipe this with my neem oil spray, I wouldn't worry at all. It's gonna be fine. Even with the white variegation on it, it's gonna be fine because it's a thicker leaf and it's a lot more sturdy. Whether this one, even though it feels like it should be more robust, it's too small, it's too itty, it's a little baby, and it's just not going to deal with it as well. So I probably wouldn't saturate. I'd probably spot check with a neem oil, and I would wash the leaves in just plain water and hope that that would work out for this one. But you just got to be so much more careful with the little ones, which is why I suggest not to go with them if you can avoid it at all. I think that has been everything that I can give you as my general tips. I will hopefully make a follow-up video that goes through all of the specific plants in my collection, and we'll do a little alocasia tour. You'll get to see each of them individually, and I'll give you some history of that plant and the general care that I give it that might be different to the other ones in my collection. So if you are interested in seeing that, please make sure that you like this video so that I know that you want more of this kind of content. Subscribe so that you can see the video when it is posted, and comment that you would like to see that video as well, so that I, don't waste my time sitting in front of a camera for absolutely nothing. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.